for Luminous Live dito sa YouTube channel. Um, One of the raging issues tungkol dito sa Dacera case is the embalming or yung pagka-imbalso ng katawan ng biktima, kung kaya't nakaapekto ito doon sa medical legal report or in fact, naaapektuhan din niya ang hininging second autopsy doon sa katawan ng biktima. But why did this happen? And what we can do only is explain why this happened and why it is such an important process din dito sa atin sa Pilipinas. But let's go back. Ano ba ang embalming? Ang embalming po usually involves the removal of bodily fluids to preserve the body para may ma-hold na wake. Okay? Dito sa Pilipinas, nagkakaroon tayo ng tinatawag na wake o lamay para may pagkakataon ang community, ang pamilya, makapagluksa, makapagpaalam, makapagritwal bago ilibing yung katawan nung yumaong kamag-anak. Dito, matagal na yung practice dito sa atin. In fact, sa Cordilleras, merong mummifications na ginagawa sa ating northern cultural communities. Dito sa mga communities na ito, maaari nating halimbawa ang pinakasikat sa ating mga cultural communities dito na nag-practice ng mummification ay yung tinaguri ang national cultural treasures ng ating bayan, which are the kabayan mummies. Okay? Yung kabayan mummies po, ito ay sa Benguet na hanap dun sa Cordilleras, and they involved a mummification technique that fell into disuse after the Spanish colonial period. So, pero dito, very unusual yung mummification natin kasi it does not involve the removal of the internal organs. Bakit mahalaga ito? Okay? Does anybody know? Bakit mahalaga yung alamin natin to? Kasi ganyan din yung pag-iimbalso natin. Pero yung purpose ng pag-iimbalso natin, yung purpose ng pag-embalso natin ay of course solely for the purpose of holding awake, ma-preserve yung body kasi decomposition happens very quickly sa human bodies. So, halimbawa sa atin, kung walang ipapabayaan lang natin ng katawan, dapat mailibing siya within 24 hours. Otherwise, there will be magkakaroon ng amoy, yung decomposition will result in yung pag-aagnas, mag-i-attract ito ng insects or pests, magkakaroon din tayo ng sanitation problems, mangangamoy and all that. So this causes a major health issue. So ang paglilibing dito sa Pilipinas ay subject to law. Halimbawa, ngayon, public safety nga and public health ang konsiderasyon. So dito ngayon, halimbawa, there's a certain number of days na required na ilibing yan ang isang katawan, depending on the municipality, pero merong mga requirements na, and one of them is embalming. Okay? Tapos, there's a certain depth, for instance, no less than 6 feet yung paglilibing ng isang katawan. Dati, the old reason for this is because beyond 6 feet, hindi na siya madidig up ng mga animals. So, that was a rule of thumb, and that goes back centuries. So, yung mga ganito, funerary and burial practices po, are a lot older than we know or than we think. Okay? So we have, so it's also for sanitation, public health purposes, kung bakit iniimbalso at nagkakaroon tayo ng mga rules tungkol dito sa what happens to a body after death. In addition to which, halimbawa ngayon na may COVID dito sa Pilipinas, pursuant to the public health laws, kailangan pagka-contagious diseases that are classified by the Department of Health, ito ay subjected to cremation within 24 hours after the death of the person. Okay. Dun sa just wanted to go through the Ibaloy technique very, very quickly. kasi it's very interesting. Yung kabayan mummification process is unusual kasi the mummification begins bago po mamatay. Okay? Bago mamatay. So, yung dying, pag alam na nilang mamamatay, pinaiinom na ng asin. Hindi asin, ng saline solution. And this helps to cleanse the body internally para at mag-umpisa yung dehydration process that will allow the body to be preserved. Hindi siya walang record na dinidrain yung bodily fluids like what they do in modern embalming techniques. Now, take note na may difference yung embalming at mummification kasi ang mummification, mas matagal yung preservation. Pero sa ibaloy, hindi po tinatanggalan ng internal organs. Katulad ng ginagawa natin ngayon sa modern embalming techniques, hindi po tinatanggal yung internal organs and may smoking process na ginagamit to dry out the bodily fluid. So, hindi necessarily dinidrain yung bodily fluids, but rather, tinutuyo siya. So, meron ngang the process of smoking. So, nagagawa ng may fire dito. So, bago mamatay, iinom na ng saline solution. Tapos, after that, ma-flush out yung bodily fluids. Ma-flush out yung bodily fluids, and after ma-flush out yung bodily fluids, nalilinis nga internally, nagda-dry out internally yung body, and then pagkamatay, ilalagay sa tinatawag nating Fowler's position, medyo medyo nakasandal, slightly raised yung tuhod, tapos pinauusukan. Binubugahan din ng usok sa loob ng bibig to further the drying out process. Okay? Magkaiba to dun sa Egyptian mummification kasi sa Egyptian mummification, lahat tinatanggal. So, dinidrain yung blood, tinatanggal yung internal organs, head, including the brain, the heart, the liver, and other portions. Tapos, meron siyang separate containers for that. Sa ating kabayan mummification process dito sa Benguet, I understand the cultural community involved here are the Ibaloy. Hindi po tinatanggal yung mga yan. And in fact, meron lang flushing of the colon, pero hindi dinidrain yung blood. Tinutuyo lang yung katawan. And along with it, the other fluids will eventually drain. So several days po ito, pinauusukan ito in a sitting process in what is called the death chair. Tapos, pagka natapos po lahat yon, binabalot ng mga traditional funerary na gayak, yung funerary blankets, at saka kung anong grave goods, bago siya isilid doon sa isang coffin at nilalagay sa mga caves or rock shelters. So, ang primary process natin is through dehydration. Ngayon, so you can see that at least dun sa part of Philippine culture and heritage includes yung parang mummification. But later on, nagkaroon na tayo ng embalming techniques. Ngayon, ang purpose ng embalming is primarily for sanitation because you want to hold awake. Diba? So, para hindi mangamoy at hindi matigil yung dehydration process habang nagkakaroon tayo ng wake. Ay, maraming salamat kay Saysay. So, para to prevent also bacteria from eating up the corpse at saka magkaroon ng other conditions. Remember also that after a day or two, yung accumulation ng gases during the natural process of decomposition, nagkakaroon ng gases yung body. So, magbo-bloat yan. And, in many cases, sumasabog. That is why iniimbalso po ang katawan. Because the natural process of decomposition leads to very nasty messes. That's why, kapag nasa law enforcement kayo, pag early detection ng isang dead body, you can place the time of death accurately. Habang tumatagal, you will have to rely on the presence of pests, like for instance, sorry sa mga kumakain, maggots and all that, appear after a certain time period, like 24 hours. Tapos yung rate of decomposition can be computed, so alam natin yung time of death based on decomposition at saka contents ng stomach. Okay. So sabi ni Ma'am Pinay Paparazzi, methane gas, that is correct. So this is the natural process of decomposition. Sabi ni Jackie, isinasama rin po ba natin yung mga alahas at mga alipin pag naglilibing ng Maharlika? Excuse me po, unang-una, ang Maharlika is not the royal class. Okay? Hindi po yan nobility. Yan yung mga lakan, yan yung mga sultan and all that. And our royalty is not the same as European royalty, which is inherited primarily by primogeniture, firstborn. Sa atin, meritorious ang sistema natin, meritocracy. So, maaari kang maging leader kung ikaw ay magaling na warrior, kung ikaw ay napatunayan mo yung sarili mo sa iyong community, you can actually become the leader later on. So, hindi ito necessarily royalty as passed on by primogeniture or by blood or by inheritance. So, wala pong ganon. So, do not mistake Maharlika to mean royalty. No po. Wala po tayong ganon. Well, hindi sa wala tayong ganon. We have some kind of loyalty where the titles are inherited. Not all communities have that. Pero, ang Maharlika po ay hindi ganyan. As a matter of fact, sila po ay ginagamit na warriors. Although they are part of the rich, medyo elite class ang Maharlika, hindi po sila ang top tier kung pag-uusapan natin yan. They were also often used by our leaders to assist them, o pagka pupunta sa giyera, sila po ang ginagamit para makapaglaban. Ang source ko po dito is William Henry Scott's Pre-Colonial Filipino. So please, yung ibang mga politicians natin, and to some extent President Marcos, hindi po kumpleto kasi yung kanilang pag-inform sa publiko tungkol dito sa class na to. So some of us think that this is royalty. No. And some of us are even suggesting to change the name of the Philippines to Maharlika. Again, hindi po sufficient para patunayan yung theory ninyo or yung prevailing belief that this is about a royalty. Hindi po ganun yon. And the presupposition that we can actually just change the country without an effect is dreaming. It's uninformed at the very least. All layers of our history are important, even the portion where we were colonized by other people. There's no need to throw out anything that belongs to our past simply because it was under a colonial past. So, wag na po tayong mag-digress, pero yun po yan. Wala pong nililibing na alipin sa atin. At least wala pa po tayong record na merong nililibing na alipin na kasama doon sa mga grave goods. Ang sinasama usually yung mga the things that we own at saka yung tinatawag natin na status symbols. So minsan merong mga may mga tradeware, yung mga pottery, may mga laman na spices, ganun. Sa Batanes, nililibing sila in boat-shaped funerary vessels. So, yung kanilang coffin ay boat-shaped. In fact, it's pretty common in other communities as well. And they are always facing the sea. Okay? Pati yung grave markers nila, hugis bangka, which shows us that they really were a seafaring people. Okay? So, maraming salamat kay Seth. Okay. Ano po ang nangyari sa Sultanate of Sulu? Teka, tapusin muna natin kasi yung pinag-uusapan natin yung pag-iembalso dito. Huwag muna tayong lumihis masyado. But syempre, in anything that we talk about, we want to include some kind of history here. So, sa atin, it is necessary to have a wake at nahaluan na ito ng Catholic practices as well. So, dinadasalan natin, we have masses, yung iba, they have masses every day, tapos meron parang novena for the dead. Yung iba tuloy-tuloy po yung pagdadasal for 40 days. And again, this is supposedly part of our Catholic practices. Pero sa totoo lang, yung iba dyan, yung 9 and 40 days, ay halo-halo na rin po yung paniniwala doon. Significant po kasi ang sabi nila ay yung 40 days ay kasi yun ang supposedly, yun yung time that the soul now ascends. Okay? Dun sa 9 days, hindi po out of nowhere kinuha ng simbahang Katoliko yung simbolo ng 9 o yung number 9 dahil ito po ay sa earlier practices including the Wiccan Celtic traditions and other traditions sa mga indigenous peoples and other shamanic traditions, ang number 9 po is the number of completion, meaning may natapos, a cycle has been completed. And so in this case, novena masses and even in funerary practices, the life has been completed. Okay? Bakit? So in the case of Miss Dacera, bakit po inembalso yung katawan? Well, dito, the hospital will not release a body until first all the fees have been paid. And then when they release it, the body identifies a funeral service. Ngayon, kung the body is being held by the Philippine National Police or the NBI pursuant to an investigation, kadalasan sila po ang nag-identify ng punerarya at nire-release po yung katawan doon. Normally, kung hindi pa po nako-conduct ang medical legal, then they will ask the funerary services to hold that in abeyance. However, you can only do that for so long. Kasi nga, according to the law itself, kailangan embalsuhin yan for health reasons, for public health reasons. So may batas din po na nag-i-inform sa ating mga punerarya how soon or how quickly they will have to start the embalming process to protect the public from the decomposing body. Okay? So, who was at fault here? Well, normally, it would have been the family who identified the funerary service. Now, hindi ako kumpleto sa facts dito, so we will take up an if or then situation. If it was the family that authorized the release to the funerary services, dapat nagbigay sila ng abiso. If it was the PNP, sila din dapat yung nagbigay ng abiso na i-hold yung katawan or to preserve it through refrigeration so that a medical legal or an autopsy can be conducted. Okay. Third, maaari din na hiningi yung autopsy with the hospital itself. So the police could have informed the family na dapat ipa-autopsy at dito na i-autopsy sa if it was Makati Med, then Makati Med or whatever hospital was holding the body. Now, the family could have also done the same. Okay, so it will really depend on the liability here will really depend on who was the person who authorized the funerary services to do the embalming. Okay? Huwag po tayong magagalit basta-basta kung kani-kanino na walang ebidensya. Mahirap naman, sinestress lang natin sarili natin. So, the hospital will just release the body in accordance with the directions of the family usually. And in this case, if the police was the one who chose the funerary service, the release of the body will still be done through the family. Okay? So, apat ang personalities involved dyan. The hospital, the family, the PNP, and the funerary services. So, hindi natin madali maipagbibintang yung funeraria kasi they are also constrained by the law to conduct the embalming after a certain period of time. Kasi nga, nagdi-decompose yung body. Now, they could have done refrigeration. That is now the remaining mystery. Now, bakit sa funeraria yan? Well, before, our law enforcement had morgues. In particular, I remember that I had always seen yung NBI morgue kasi maraming kwentong multo yan eh. That's why alam ko na may morgue yung NBI. Madalas kasi ako doon because I have clients who were detained or I work with law enforcement sometimes in a consultant's basis, unpaid consultant. So, dati meron po tayong mga morgue at hinuhold natin doon yung mga katawan ng mga na-identified o kaya yung mga hinuhold pending a thorough autopsy and medico-legal investigation. Okay? Ngayon, naging masyadong expensive kasi yung refrigeration niyan. And so, instead of funding the electricity and better means of preserving the bodies for purposes of investigation, then what our legislature did instead was they stopped the morgues altogether and instead allowed law enforcement to identify morgues to serve as their, to identify funeral services to serve as their morgues. Okay? Ngayon, hindi lahat ng funeral services ay may refrigeration. Meron yung mga maliliit lang, or kung meron man silang refrigeration, yung hinuhold yung katawan for certain purposes, mga maliliit lang yon or kokoanti lang yon. But that is the primary service kung bakit yung primary reason kung bakit yung mga funerary services po ay ina-identify ng ating law enforcement agencies. I think that tama po kayo, marami pong nagsuggest kanina po sa karambola na siguro it's time to ask our legislatures, are you serious about law enforcement? Because if you are, hindi tayo mag-lip service lang dito sa mga nag-create tayo ng SOCO, merong alleged forensic lab or may laboratory at saka merong medico-legal ang NBI, pero how much do we really support our law enforcement agencies and their abilities to be able to do detection and investigation? Okay? Malaking issue yan that our legislators have not seen it fit to pay more attention to. Malay mo nga naman, baka sila yung hulihin di ba? Okay. Sabi ni Benedict Corpus, who handles what is STDs? Guys, please don't use abbreviations because I will not understand and I might not be able to get back to your question. Legal po ba dito ang euthanasia? Sabi ni Roldan, hindi po. It's called murder. Sabi ni Saysay, not sure po if our schools offer courses for forensics. I read somewhere that the Philippines has only 2 forensic doctors. No, we only have 2 forensic pathologists. Okay, pathology is a very specific study of medicine. So, but we have medical-legal experts. So, these medical-legal experts naman are both lawyers and doctors. Yun yung requirement para sa kanila. There's a difference between forensics and medico-legal. The medico-legal will make the examination of the body and note all of its observations, but they will not make conclusions. It is the forensic experts who will make those conclusions or help interpret the data for our law enforcers or for our lawyers when this evidence is presented in court. Okay? Sa may mga kaso kagaya ni Dacera, ano po ang legal processes bago magpa-autopsy at magpa-imbalso? Nasagot na natin po yan. Pharaohs were buried with models of their servants while earlier pharaohs were buried with real servants involuntarily. Sabi ni the Indefatigable, that is correct. It depends on what period of history in Egypt. And Egypt has a very, very long history. We're talking about thousands of years and several dynasties. Now, in some dynasty in China, they also buried replicas or representations of their people. Hence, we have the Jade Warriors who were buried. Their likenesses were buried with their emperor, the Jade Emperor. Sabi ni Genesis Omega, maraming salamat po sa dunong ninyo. Sabi ni Melo Marcos, di po ba automatic? Pag may crime like murder, SOCO ang mag-iimbestiga? Hindi po. Because SOCO is scene of the crime. They don't investigate the body. That is up to the medico-legal. So, sometimes kasi, hindi evident that a crime has been committed. And although, to be safe, that is what the police do in any case where there is a body, dapat may SOCO. And you are right, wala po tayong naririnig na anything tungkol dito sa SOCO, wala pong investigation into the crime scene itself na naririnig tayo. That doesn't mean wala po, it just means na wala tayong naririnig. Meron po bang nagha-handle ng standards for funeral parlors? Yes, meron po. Para po ma-require lahat ng funeral parlors ay may cold storage. Usually, it is the local governments that do that. Pero kung i-identify kayo as a morgue that provides services for law enforcement, yes, merong certain number of facilities that you're required to have. Binibid din po yan. Sabi ni Ma'am Sambuanga Hermosa, baka mas sexually transmitted diseases. Well, as we know, sexually transmitted can only be transmitted sexually. Wow, sineryoso ko talaga yung tanong. Sabi ni Ian, sino po ang pinakamataas na tier? Kung may mas mataas pa, yung nobility na nga. Let me check at their names. Pero sila yung mga tinatawag na lakan nga in some areas. Iba-iba po kasi. In fact, yung Maharlika na yan, if I'm not mistaken, Tagalog yan. Okay. Sa mga, ano po nangyari sa Sultanate of Sulu? Bakit na yung, hindi ko na gets yung question. Tatalakayin niyo po ba ang ibang pagkakataon ang constitutional reform na sisimulan ng House at final ni na Senator Bato at Senator Tol? I have to see the resolution first bago natin i-discuss yan. So, hindi natin i-discuss dito, pero later on po, most likely we will. Ilang oras po ba dapat na ma-autopsy agad ang body kasi di ba naaagnas din yan. Ino-autopsy yan. The autopsy can be done at any time, although the value of the findings diminish. Hindi naman yung value. Mas nagdi-diminish yung capacity natin to find out things because you can do an autopsy on a skeleton. The autopsy doesn't necessarily mean you're opening up a body. It means you're examining a body or the remains for purposes to find out the cause of death or other circumstances. Okay? Kailangan ba ng legislation para bumalik ang government morgue? Yes, because that would be an outlay for infrastructure. Yes. So an autopsy can be conducted even years later, ha? Sabi ni Noel Sams, alin bang naunang toxicology test or embalming? Okay guys, let's get one thing clear. A toxicology report is not normal. Okay, it's not really conducted all the time. What the medical legal does is, based on the circumstances, they will conduct a test. For instance, blood alcohol and all that. They will do blood work. Normally yan. Blood work is normal. Toxicology, not normal. Extraordinary yan. But if the circumstances warrant, they will have that. Guys, I want you to get something very, very, very clear. Wala tayong CSI katulad ng pinapanood ninyo sa TV. And if you're a fan of American cop shows, magkaiba tayo ng proseso. Kaya siguro napipikon yung ibang mga tao pag tinatanong ninyo, saan yung tox report, nasan yung blood work, nasan yung ganito. First, find out if it is part of the usual procedure. And find out also, bago kayo magalit sa ating mga law enforcers, kung bakit hindi ito bahagi ng normal procedure. Because even in other countries, if the death is evident, the medical legal or the autopsy is merely confirmatory. If there is other evidence to look further into the body, then that is the time the further examination will be justified. Alam niyo kung bakit? Kasi mahal yun. It entails a cost. And who is going to pay for that cost? Diba? If it is done every time and it is not necessary, sinong magbe-bear ng cost na yan? Tayo, the taxpayers. Or, and this is the worst part, or the family. Now, if the family is poor, or the family, are the people who want a cover-up, then that is going to be problematic later on for our law enforcers. Okay? Thank you kay Saysay, ha? Okay, sine-check ko yung iba. And please don't think na pag tumataas ang boses ko, galit ako. It's just for emphasis. Did Pau have an autopsy of the body of the Sera? No. Sabi ni Saysay, if government cannot afford morgues, more likely the private firms won't afford having refrigeration facilities as well. Yes, kasi binabayad. Somebody has to pay for that. Okay? Greetings, sabi ni Bong Pontanares. Opo, so sad nga, sabi ni Ma'am ZHF. Wala tayong CSI or NCIS. Well, NCIS is naval. Actually, nandito, the U.S. Embassy actually has the NCIS here. Some of them. Sabi ni Benedict Corpus, hindi naman lahat ng nasa ibang bansa ay applicable sa atin. I guess time na rin na government through legislation na ayusin ang infrastructure for our law investigators. Agree naman din po. Lahat ng makakatulong sa pag-imbestiga, tinatanggal ng mga corrupt officials like Pau, tinanggal ang budget, sabi ni Ghost DJ. But the good news is, nilay na item veto ni Pangulo yon. Sabi ni Ian, side comment, ang ganda po ng topic last time about heritage and culture like Torre de Manila. Sana more of those topics in the future. Well, we started this one with heritage and some history. Magandang umaga kay Regine. Same po ba ang gamit na freezing ng body at ng cooling ng vaccine? Hindi po. Mas masyadong mababa yung temperature requirement ng vaccine, which is -70, which will affect also, hindi na preservative yan masyado sa body. In some instances, ice crystals that can form kapag bagong patay pa lang at ilalagay mo, if i-freeze mo ng ganon, the ice crystals that form can also do damage to the body and might affect the autopsy later on. So, hindi ganong kalamig na deep freeze na -70 degrees. Iba po yan. Sabi ni Pesto, just a comment, mukhang ang dami palang trabaho ng legislators para mas maging effective ang investigation at enforcement ng ating PNP. Nako, titignan ninyo, ang daming dapat binabago din dun sa ating revised penal code at sa ating mga investigative methods. In fact, ang NBI, dapat meron silang semi-autonomous status. Kasi dun pa lang alam niyo yung NBI clearance, ang laki ng kinikita niyan, but none of that goes to the NBI. It all goes to the National Treasury. Dati, matagal na kaming nagsusulang, part of our advocacy is magsulong ng sariling pondo ang NBI para hindi masyadong madali i-corrupt yung kanilang mga ahente. So, but of course, hindi ginagawa ng ating legislators ito because it is so dangerous for them. If you give them semi-autonomous status, hindi na po matatakot ang mga legislators natin dun sa mga nasa posisyon, nakaposisyon at mayayaman, di ba? Sabi ni Benedict, huwag din po tayo magalit sa mga investigador kasi minsan may pressure din sila from powerful sources. At the end of the day, sila pa ang nadidemanda. Well, thank you. Tama naman sa pagpapaalala nyo yun sa amin. Sabi ni Ian Poral, sa Visayas at Mindanao region, meron po ba may culture ng embalming ng mga ninuno natin? Wala po tayong record of that, not even in the archaeological record, kasi otherwise magkakaroon tayo ng hindi. Embalming, we're not sure. Pero matagal na po kasi yung practice ng embalming since the 1800s po. Sa Visayas and Mindanao, prior to that, wala po tayong record of that. Kasi in a tropical country and in areas kung saan mainit, madali mag-decompose yung body. So the practice really is mabilis yung paglilibing. Bago agnasin yung katawan. That's why sa Cordilleras may mummification kasi may period hindi ganun kabilis yung decomposition. May panahon pa para to conduct the mummification techniques. Sabi ni Captain MP, dati po kumikita NBI 20 pesos entrance and 5 pesos per fingerprint. Ngayon nawala na yung sa Presidente Duterte na umupo. Yeah, because it should be done by legislation. Yung mga ganon leaves them open to the possibility of corruption kasi sa kanila pumupunta and if there is no legislation, that will be graft. Yeah. Sabi ni Megazord, is it necessary to pass a law creating CSI in the Philippines? SOCO seems to be limited and outdated. Um, Alam niyo ba kung ano ang CSI? Those are private labs dun sa US. These are not government labs. Most crime scene investigator laboratories are private labs that are contracted by the government. Okay? Please remember that. So you don't create that by law. You create the service, and then what you amend in the law is to allow law enforcement to contract out the crime scene investigations and analysis. Pero, somebody's still going to pay for that. Okay? Now, if you want a CSI, crime scene investigation or laboratories or meron na ng SOCO. We need to upgrade that, and we need to be able to find a way to keep to be able to check if they're doing the right thing, or to keep them, how do you call this, good, away from corruption. Okay? Sabi ni Elpats Jepo, yan po sino pala ng kapapanood ng foreign cop shows, imbis na aralin ng sarili nating police procedures, ipipilit yung procedure sa ibang bansa. Correct. Tsaka kasi, pag nanonood kayo ng foreign shows, understand na foreign yung procedures. Okay? Sabi ni Jemshid, ang problema kasi sa NBI natin, bago ka makapasok, dapat may backup pa sa'yo na politiko. I don't think that's always the case. Sabi ni Joel Carrasco, kung tanga, walang alam, disconnected and dated ang utak ng mga legislators, pwede bang mag-suggest ang isang ordinaryong tao about the important laws na para sa bayan? Meron nga po tayong, di ba, yung parang Citizens Act na pwede tayong mag-suggest ng legislation, pero yung requirement po na nilagay nila sa batas, ay, ano ba yan, 10%? So, mataas po yung requirement. Sabi ni Pesto, does our PNP currently have a legal team or department they can consult so they can put out solid cases most of the time? They do. They have a legal department normally, at yung ibang mga pulis ay abogado rin. The problem is, if you're a full-time law enforcer, you're not practicing. So, ang ginagawa sa ibang bansa, halimbawa sa states, ang investigation is directed by the prosecutor, by the by the Attorney General's office. So, the amount of evidence that is acquired by our cops will be under the direction of the person who will prosecute the case. At that ensures a better chance of winning. Kasi yung abogado na mag-prosecute, siya yung magsasabi na, okay, ito, kaya ko nang ipanalo ito. Okay? Topic request ni Steve Bonsol, yung Rebel Soldier Stories, kayo po yung counsel, lumabas sa tambayan with General Danny Lim. Naluha din daw po siya. Yes, pero give me some time. Medyo sariwa pa. Okay, last two. Meron naman po tayong CSI, manood ng tambayan, may Mystic Day investigation po with Attorney Nick. Correct. We try to be as varied about our information as possible. So yun, yung reasons for the embalming and how it came to be, despite the fact that the case was still under investigation, will really depend on who authorized it. So, but remember, there was also a balancing of interests. Yung mga funeral services natin, they can hold the body only for so long. Okay? After which, they have to start the embalming process. Or, if they were supposed to be holding them in a freezer-type facility with refrigeration, dapat dinirect yun, at saka dapat naayos yung pagbabayad nun. Kasi these are private funeral parlors, may issue ng sinong magbabayad nun. Diba? Including, kasama ba yan dun sa kabayaran, dun sa pag-identify sa kanila ng ating law enforcement agencies. Kung meron man. There need to review PD 856. There's always a need to review our old laws. Sabi ni Airpods Jepoy, it's not exactly on topic but it's worth reading. I don't mind paying higher PhilHealth premium. Wala naman akong magagawa eh. Pero yari sa akin mga kupal dyan sa gobyerno sa 2022 elections. Kahit dyan man lang makabawi ako or tayo. Pwede ba akong mag-agree 10 million times dito sa comment mo? Sabi ni Jemshid, dapat sa SOCO natin may mga forensic pathologists para naman maging mataas ang investigation nila pag need mag-autopsy. So yes, I agree that we have to start putting up scholarship funds for forensic pathologists kasi that requires extra so many years of study. So sana meron ganyan dito, but we have to, hindi pwedeng matapos sa sana lang. I think mag-identify tayo ng mga institutions that provide scholarships or medical institutions that provide scholarships at dun tayo mag-donate. Mag-identify ako. I'm going to ask for help sa mga kaibigan nating doktor. Okay. And finally, magkano kailangan para ma-upgrade ang SOCO natin? Well, I can't say that off the cuff kasi kailangan kong alamin kung ano ang pangangailangan. Doon pa lang sa day-to-day ng SOCO, ano yung mga chemicals na kailangan nila, ano yung mga training, ano yung lab requirements nila, ano pang mga professionals we have to hire. So we need to review first or investigate kung ano ang nandun sa SOCO. But we also need to have also more private experts who can check our government experts kapag sila po ay nagkakaroon ng agenda. So that means, if we're going to fund for the scholarship of doctors, hindi lang po sila sa gobyerno magtatrabaho, but to keep them also in the private sector so that there is always somebody who will give us a more expanded opinion, or if we need an opinion that does not necessarily adhere to the agenda of those who are already in government. Kasi sometimes we cannot keep our full faith and trust in the government. We must be able to trust the science. Okay? And on that, maraming salamat po. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion to kasi we take questions. Don't forget to like and share and to subscribe dito sa YouTube channel natin. Also, don't forget to like and follow sa Luminous by Trixie Cruz-Angeles and Ahmed Paglinawan so you will get further notices kapag meron po tayong ganito. Don't forget, maraming salamat dun sa super chatters natin sa pagpapadala sa inyo ng aming pangkape. And for those who want the Luminous face mask, they're 120 pesos. Just send a PM to RD Malano. Okay, ulitin ko po yan, PM RD Malano for the face masks. And if you want calendars also, you can make arrangements with him. He might have to ask you for the cost of the delivery of your calendars and your face masks as well. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Don't forget like and share and subscribe. At natin, so this helps in the discussion online para mataasan din yung antas ng pagdidiscuss natin because this helps the government to correct itself. Maraming salamat. Have a good day, everybody.